Good evening, everyone. I am Kit Cloninger. I am hosting for Scotty. He is currently unavailable to be on camera, so I'm doing that for tonight. We've got a little bit of an interesting show tonight, or a very interesting show, and then later on we'll be having a talk about the upcoming snow and ice event that we'll be having on Thursday night into Friday and even Saturday for most of the Western Carolinas and even up into Virginia. So that'll be a show later on, separate from this one. Not going to talk too much about the snow, except for what we got today. We had a couple flurries come through from the west, separate event from what we're looking at tomorrow. But right now we'll go around the panel. We'll start with Shay and just give our quick little intro of our panelists and weather reports. Shay?
Hi, Kit. How are you? Yeah, we're looking at some cool temperatures tonight, not near freezing along the coastline, but we're seeing a little disturbance to our west, dropping some sleet. Kind of interesting for our area. Let me share a screen with that real quick and kind of give a idea of what's going on. So, can you see that okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, so here's our weak disturbance to the west. It's more of a warm front, cold front, so temperatures are above freezing, but there is a little bit of sleet falling from some of those colder altitudes at the mid-levels. We could call this a mid-level disturbance from Georgia up to South Carolina. Looks like it's drying out as it approaches the coastline, but we could get a little bit of extra momentum here. And not expecting any accumulations from this, but sort of a precursor for this winter storm that we're looking at coming. It's almost like the atmosphere from the mid-levels and upper levels is almost set up for it. The only thing we have is warm air injection from our warmer waters. So that's kind of what we're looking at for right now. We're supposed to be warming up ahead of this winter storm tomorrow and Friday, and then things will cool down. It just really depends on where that low pressure tracks. It's right now a lot of the models are agreeing on it being right off our coastline. So we're in sort of watch mode, but pretty mild here for the most part along the coast. Back to you.
All right, Shay. Well, I'll go ahead and toss it on up the coast to Mr. Weatherman Pete Plantamente. I kind of butchered your name there. Sorry about that. Peter
Oh, that's
Plantamente.
fine. I'm used to it. Uh, anyway, we got some flurries and snow showers coming by tonight. Temperatures in the mid-20s, and then we'll be good tomorrow, sunny 35. But then, of course, we're all anticipating that big snowstorm up here in the Northeast for the weekend. Still don't know what's really going to happen with that yet, but it could be a big storm, so we're keeping our eyes on that. We have a winter storm watch out as of right now, so should be fun to track the next few days.
Indeed, it has been a big thrill the past couple days watching the models as they have converged on this event. Joey, anything over there in Thomasville?
We got a little bit today. A little dusting. Not cold enough for me to shut my window yet. That's still cracked. But I'm fat and hot, so you know how it goes. But anyway, yeah, I'm looking forward to this. This weekend. Should have some fun. I think a lot of people are underestimating. We're gonna save that for the show after this show. So anybody's watching now, make sure you come back here after the show so we can get into that. That's pretty much all I got over here.
All right, you might want to check where you got your mic. I think it got covered up once or twice when you were talking there. All right, well, with no further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. This is a live show, so you can tweet us, and we also have a Q&A section, so you can post a question up there. We'll read it and ask it on the show. Also, we will be monitoring social media. We have some of ours posted on our pages here, or you can tweet the Carolina Weather Group itself, and we'll be sure to include that. The topic is Earthquakes 101, and with us we have from the College of Charleston, Dr. Jamais. He is here, so why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Steve Jamais. I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, so I'm used to tropical weather. It's fairly similar here in Charleston. I actually started off hoping to be a petroleum geologist. That's often the dream of young geologists in Louisiana. Turned out not to be, and eventually got into earthquakes. And after, well, if one is a geologist, you wind up seeing the planet. So after a couple of stints, including working in Australia for a few years, I wandered up here on the faculty at the College of Charleston, and I'm basically mostly studying the earthquakes and earthquake hazards in the Charleston area.
Very cool. And we did have one other guest. He couldn't make it on due to some technical difficulties, Alan Broerse. Hopefully we can get him on maybe for a later show. But first thing, I'll toss it over to Shay. I know he had a couple of things prepared. If you want to go ahead and start off the questions for the evening.
Sure. Yeah, I'm from Charleston as well, so we're always hearing about tremors or things in the newspaper and the news that happen. A lot of those are due to some of the military aircraft and sonic booms, and there's this link to Seneca guns. So that's one question I wanted to kind of ask, because that name gets thrown out there a lot for either tremors or sonic booms. And what do you know about Seneca guns, and are they real?
I have heard of it. I've never heard them, and I've never seen any definite evidence of one. But you hear enough about it, and of course it didn't start here in Charleston. That's actually Seneca. That's up in New York. But you do hear about booming noises in places near big bodies of water. So I wouldn't be surprised they exist. But it would really help if we had some kind of an actual record so that we could figure out what it's coming from. So my opinion is I don't really have one, because I haven't seen anything to get my teeth into to give me any information about it, other than I know other people have heard it and have reported it to me, but I do not know, and I don't know anyone who actually knows what they are.
Yeah, it's kind of the going myth. It's a total mythical kind of force that happens. Some say sound compression waves, some say it could be residual thunder booms from inland traveling downslope and then resonating as they go over the coastline. But I think a lot of those are probably tuned into military aircraft, some of their training that they do offshore, especially because the coasts, the beaches usually hear that first, and they report it being the loudest. But as far as activity, seismic activity in the southeast region, tell us a little bit about that. I know we have a fault line in Somerville, we have another one in Savannah. Tell us what sort of activities we have, and then what are we looking at for what's under the ground, what's causing these?
Yeah. Well, actually, in South Carolina, we do have pretty much earthquakes everywhere in the state. They're mostly concentrated under Somerville, but they actually occur other places. I was actually preparing a presentation on that, sort of on earthquakes in the low country, and there have been reasonable sized ones. There was one in 2002 off the coast, about magnitude 4.5. There was something further inland towards Orangeburg, kind of also in the magnitude 4 range back in the 70s. Plus, and then you have this real cluster under Somerville, which is where the center of the big 1886 earthquake is. So there's not just one fault. Actually, do you remember the Valentine's Day earthquake from like 2 years ago?
Yeah, 2014.
Upstate.
It was up near Edgeville, South Carolina.
Yeah.
I think that was 4.1 or something. Yeah, that was felt over a lot of the state.
Yeah, those fell well into Georgia. Yeah, since it was close to the border there. So we actually do have earthquake activity throughout the state of South Carolina. It's just more concentrated here. One thing, learning as a geologist and learning about the history of the Earth, you realize everywhere on the planet at one time or another was on a plate boundary like California is now. So everywhere has faults. The question is, do the conditions exist at this particular time that they keep moving? Right? So our mystery here in the Charleston area is not so much that we have a fault moving, but why is this one moving versus I don't know of any movement down by Savannah, so I'm not sure where you got that from. But why here? Why not in Savannah? Why not up the coast in Myrtle Beach? Why is it concentrated here is more the question now, as opposed to being somewhere else. And that's that works for here in Charleston. People heard about the Central Mississippi Valley earthquakes.
Yeah, on the New Madrid fault.
Yeah, the New Madrid fault. Why there? Why in the middle of the country too? Why are certain places hot spots away from a plate boundary, so out away from California, and others are not? And then you have what, like I said, call them a warm spot instead of a hot spot, Central Virginia. The earthquake in 2011, right? That was a known area of earthquakes. Not as active as either New Madrid out in the center of the country, not as active as Charleston, but it popped up. The biggest one in the recent history happened to be in that area. So that's kind of our mystery is why do some of these old faults reactivate in certain places away from plate boundaries but not others? And no one, to my knowledge, has a good answer for any of that.
Does it have anything to do with bedrock, limestone, any of these
No.
deeper, harder layers?
It's always in the deeper materials, generally below the limestone and things like that. The only correlation that some people have made, places where the crust formerly split apart. So, the case here in here in South Carolina. I used to live in Oregon too. Basically Africa separated from us to create the Atlantic Ocean off the South Carolina coast. So we know when that plate boundary occurred. We had a rifting event. In the New Madrid area, there was, they call it a failed rift. So North America started to split in half down the line of the Mississippi River, but it didn't get finished. So those two fit an idea. There are these old rifts, we call old places where continents started splitting apart, now have concentrations of earthquakes. Problem is, the Central Virginia ones don't fit that. So that knocks that idea out as being a general explanation for these things.
Now, you started to mention how, like, we're in the middle of the plate,
Yeah.
nowhere near a plate boundary like California. How, like, in the nature of our earthquakes versus Californian earthquakes, how much difference is there, or is it just earthquakes are earthquakes?
There is a little bit of difference in the earthquakes. What we generally find we call South Carolina and the central U.S. intraplate. So instead of being plate boundary, intra inside of a plate. We find there's one of the things that governs the energy release in earthquakes, something we call a stress drop. For earthquakes here in the eastern U.S., central and eastern U.S., tend to be higher than they are in places like California. But it basically means the faults are stronger. It takes more energy to overcome the friction, so when they do finally let go, they've built up more stress, sort of per unit area of the fault that moves. So they release proportionally more energy for the size of the fault that moves. So that's one thing that makes them different. So in terms of the seismic waves, you get more high-frequency seismic waves out of the earthquake, more hyper-frequency vibrations here in the east versus out west. A second difference, which, and this is very important for the potential damage, the rock mass, the crust here in the central and eastern U.S. is generally harder and colder, so it transmits the seismic waves more efficiently. So for the same magnitude earthquake, and just to let you know, magnitude describes the amount of energy released at the epicenter or on the fault that actually moves during the earthquake. As that energy travels through the earth, it gets gradually absorbed as it travels through the different rock formations. If you have very strong, solid, cold rock here in the east, it transmits very far without losing energy. You go out west, where things are warmer and more broken up because they have more faults that are moving all the time, it gets absorbed more quickly. So for the same magnitude, the damage potential here in the eastern U.S. is much larger than it is in the western U.S. And I don't have that figure, and I'm not actually sure how to share it anyway. I might be able to find it and send it to someone to show it. A colleague of mine looked at two earthquakes, the Virginia earthquake I was talking about earlier, and a similar-sized California earthquake in 2004, and mapped the area over which people reported feeling the earthquake. Same magnitude, right? So the same energy release at the center, vastly different areas. So the Virginia earthquake, it was felt here in Charleston. It was up the East Coast, pretty far inland. This one in California, same size, was never felt outside the state of California. And that's the degree to which the seismic waves are absorbed by the Earth varies from east to west.
Does that have anything to do with plasticity of the clays and loams along the Midlands?
No, not really. This is deeper within the solid crust below that material. That surface material can have a localized effect. We call that a site response. You can have a localized effect from the superficial materials, but it's the deeper stuff that governs sort of how far out things travel.
You mentioned,
yeah.
You mentioned that the Earth in California was warmer than it is in the Southeast.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of our viewers right now are wondering, does that have anything to do with the air temperature, or is that a different?
No, we're talking about the heat flow from the center of the Earth. So the Earth's internal heat radiating out. It's a combination of that. Also, when you have a lot of faults moving, that rock moving against each other creates friction. So some of it's literally frictional heating along these faults, combined with you tend to have more volcanic. You have volcanic activity also out west. As you're moving things around, you're giving more opportunities for volcanoes to form. So you're basically creating conditions where more heat is both being generated by the faults. Is also things kind of get leaky and the heat can escape better. Whereas when we're out in the colder material out here, it's a good, nice, solid cap on the Earth's interior heat and doesn't really let it through.
Go ahead, Kit.
Like you're talking about how the Virginia earthquake could be felt all the way around. I didn't feel it. I was on the couch, but in Belmont, we did feel it.
Yeah. I didn't feel it either. I was at the beach. Actually, you'll appreciate this. Just thinking about it. Guess why I was at the beach that day?
Were you looking for new seismic zones?
No. Think what this group normally talks about.
You're looking at
August 2011. What else happened in August 2011? See if you guys remember. It didn't hit the Carolinas.
I'm guessing some sort of a hurricane.
Yeah. Anybody remember the big hurricane of 2011? Think further north.
Sandy?
Irene.
Irene. Thank you.
That's what it was.
So
Sandy was 2012. I'm sorry.
yeah, Irene was on the way. We didn't yet know whether it was going to hit us or bypass and go north, which it eventually did. So I didn't have to teach any classes that day. I went down the beach to take photographs of the known erosion spots so that I could go afterwards, after the hurricane passed through, retake the photographs and do a comparison. So I was walking out on the beach. I just finished lunch. I'd kind of gone Isle of Palms, north of Charleston, did my run there in the morning, had my lunch, was walking Folly Beach, and then my phone starts going crazy because people in Charleston were feeling the earthquake, so people started calling me. But I was down at the beach because there was a hurricane on the way.
Hey, Shay, I just want to remind you that Hurricane Sandy dumped like 60 inches of snow in West Virginia. That wasn't August.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know what I was thinking.
That was like October.
It's funny because I actually went out. I was Isle of Palm surfing in Irene, so I mean I was there doing it.
So I may have seen you then.
Yeah, I've got a sandbar collection of photos all the way back to the U.S. Geological Survey and in the Chucktown Wind Report. I'll show it to you another time, but you might find that fascinating, the shifting of the sandbar, and after Irene, it was a major change out there at Reach Inlet. So some fascinating stuff with that event. Now, I know that our other guest, Alan Broerse, is not here, and we've talked a little bit about the East Coast, and I definitely want to touch back on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and how it's still affecting the Appalachian Mountains, and maybe where some shifting is going on there. But I want to shift the topic to the west now, to Oklahoma, where we've been seeing a lot of activity. I mean, significantly increased activity out there. I'm reading 585 earthquakes in 2014 and only 109 in 2013. So we've got
700 in 2015.
Is it more than that?
Yeah, more.
Okay, 700 in 2015. So it's only up. It's on the increase. Mm-hmm. And some sources are pointing to injection of wastewater byproducts into deep ground disposal wells as a possible cause. So, do you think this is man-made? Do you think it has anything to do with fracking or shale gas?
Yeah, it's man-made. Actually, we were talking a little earlier. One of the things I do once a month, there's a conference call among seismologists, basically east of the Rocky Mountains, and these days we almost always start off with the Oklahoma report. So that's kind of one of the big topics in seismology in this part of the country is what's going on in Oklahoma. And my personal opinion is, yeah, it's the injection of these waste fluids, which now if you talk to a petroleum person, a petroleum engineer, petroleum geologist, they will adamantly say it's not fracking because they're using the very narrow technical definition of fracking, and they would be correct. But it's a byproduct of the petroleum operations which have been enabled by fracking. They basically wind up with a lot more contaminated water to dispose of than they ever had before. So starting about 2009 or so, we started to notice the first uptick in earthquakes in Oklahoma, and the increases correlate very well with the amount of fluid that's being pumped into the earth crust. And the real basic physics of that, you're forcing this fluid down into places where there wasn't nearly as much. And it's lubricating faults. So, you think about just basic friction, right? You have two surfaces held together by friction. You put some kind of a fluid in between into that surface, make it a little more slick, reduce that normal stress holding it together. It's going to slide more easily. So you're effectively lubricating things. As long as you continue pumping more down there, you're going to further lubricate it, makes it easier to slip. Things should continue.
So just for our viewers, we're talking about aquifers, freshwater aquifers that are between 0 and 2,000 feet below the surface, and then where fracking is much deeper to 6,000 to 10,000 feet. So they're punching through the aquifers, and then they're drilling down into their base to mine for shale gas, and then when they remove the drill, is that where this occurs? Is the water is leaking down into the layers and permeating, or how's this happening?
What it's actually doing is yeah, you're right. It's more like 6,000 to 10,000 feet is where they're pulling out the shale gas. The disposal wells are typically going even deeper than that. So they're usually disposal wells typically are drilled down below even the shale gas layers. And in Oklahoma, typically they're pumped in what's called the Arbuckle Formation, which is a very porous limestone. But right below the limestone is the granite basement. And the faults that are moving are actually in the granite basement below this Arbuckle Formation. So as it turns out, the sedimentary rocks that tend to host both the freshwater aquifers and the oil and gas aquifers are not strong enough to store enough stress to produce big earthquakes. So changes to those may produce some micro earthquakes, but they're not really going to be anything that's basically dangerous. It's the faults that we call the basement, the granites and harder rocks down below those layers. When those guys move, those produce your bigger earthquakes. And at least the top portion of those faults, where it's in contact with the sediments above, are starting to be lubricated a lot, and that's where we're finding all the earthquakes. Our worry is that they're going to eventually start propagating downwards and get bigger. And that's a big unknown. That's a kind of a colleague out in Oklahoma said that basically they're doing a really big science experiment in the state of Oklahoma. This is something that's actually never been done on this scale in human history. Oh, I'm trying to, yeah, go ahead.
Is there any record of any sort of similar operation, or maybe even with nuclear testing back in the 60s and 70s? Have we ever increased seismicity in a certain area?
We have, but not on this scale. Yes, the nuclear testing actually does. The underground nuclear test often produced aftershocks, but again, nothing at this scale. It's not so much what we're doing, but how much. It's kind of I don't know if you've heard that old saying. I think quantity has a quality all its own. Anybody heard a saying like that?
I've heard that before.
Numbers matter, right? And it's the sheer numbers, the sheer volume of fluid being put into the crust that has exceeded anything done before, and it's a huge response because of the huge amount of fluid. Of course, this is my personal opinion, right? A different seismologist will probably explain it differently, but to give you an idea, it's the sheer volume of what they're doing out there is staggering. And
So, what would your actions, or you personally, if you were put in charge one day, what would be your decision to like remedy this or
okay,
continue?
put in charge in what fashion? Am I king? I can do anything I want, or
You are ruler of the
regulator?
fracking industry.
A ruler of the industry. That's a different creature. If I was a state official, it'd be different than I work for the industry. Well, let's say I work for the industry. The question I would have is, well, I would get good lawyers, just in case. No, seriously. The thing that bothers me personally is this is part of the world where earthquakes are not common. The building codes do not generally take that into account. And my kind of nightmare on this is waking up one morning and finding out that a school's been knocked down with kids in it. Right? I mean, just because they're not really prepared for it. And if I were one of these companies doing this work, that would frighten me also, because if they can tie that earthquake to my operation legally, now, of course, I don't know the legal rules and laws in Oklahoma how that could be pursued, but you'd be in trouble.
Very true.
So if I were them, I would say, is there something else we can do with this fluid? The bad news is it's nasty. This is a very briny water with a lot of other things that have been absorbed out of the rock that they have to dispose of. But the question I would ask is twofold. One is, what does it cost to clean it up enough, let's say, to make it gray water that could be used for agricultural purposes? So you don't have to necessarily make it potable, but just make it safe to leave on the surface. So again, you don't want to contaminate freshwater aquifers. Another way, and this is being a little more entrepreneurial, is I say there's nasty stuff dissolved in the water, but if you evaporated the water, is some of that nasty stuff things that you could separate out and package and sell to somebody. So one man's trash is another man's treasure. Another old saying is, what's dissolved in this water? Does it, in a different form, have value? So I'm trying to be an entrepreneur. In a sense, can you recycle some of that material? So while cleaning up the water to make it safe to leave on the surface, so you don't want to drill it, dispose of it deep, and kind of recoup some of your cost by producing something somebody else wants to buy. So you're actually being more environmentally conscious overall, but you're also kind of being a smart businessman and thinking, is there something everybody else just gets rid of that we could actually turn into something we can sell? Don't know the answer to the question, but that's a way I would actually think, and it kind of, kill two birds with one stone. I'd start a new industry, potentially, and be safe from having to worry about that maybe my disposal well just killed some people.
All right. Well, as we're winding down to the middle of the hour, we're trying to get things wrapped up. Any other final questions from any of y'all? I'm good.
Just one. Any thing to add about the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and our mountain chain? Anything in between for faults and any activities? I know we had a big earthquake in 1886. Charleston was the last major earthquake, but anything you can add to it?
Not off the top of my head. There's actually a different person down the hall who actually could probably pontificate more on that question, who's not here tonight. No, nothing that comes to mind I really feel I need to talk about.
I will say on the late 1800s Charleston earthquake, It was felt in Dallas, North Carolina. I'm not sure if you would know that name, but that's
Not
my
North
hometown and
Carolina.
has been my hometown since I was a really little kid, and my parents' hometowns and their parents' hometowns. But you can still see some earthquake bolts in some of the really old buildings because of the Charleston earthquake.
You should come tour down here. We're Earthquake Bolt Central.
Yeah, I've got some cousins who live in Somerville. My parents are actually driving down to visit them on
Oh,
Thursday, so maybe they'll run into you one day.
maybe.
But with that, we would like to thank Dr. Jemay for coming. If you have any more questions, do you have an email or Twitter or something, some way that they can?
Email. I think you have my email,
Uh-huh.
so
So,
you can put it out to where people can see it.
all right.
Or just want me to say it out
Yeah,
loud?
yeah, you can go ahead and.
It's my last name, Jaume, first initial S, at cofc.edu. So I'll give you my work email. So this is kind of my professional activities here.
Very nice.
Now,
And go ahead.
Kit,
Joe.
I was going to say that we had to do a shorter show tonight because of the winter storm. We're trying to get a special in to do that. So we do want to do this show again, so we can put a little bit more time into it. You think you'd be glad to come back maybe a little bit later, and we'll do this again?
Yeah, I could certainly do that. Arrange it.
Awesome.
Arrange it.
Hopefully next time we'll have Alan's stuff worked out too, so we
Yeah.
can get him in too. So
Okay.
we can get both you guys talking back and forth about the differences in areas.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to bring any colleagues in as well, feel free. I mean, we'd love to have more on.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's sometimes, well, like I said, I have a fiance and a dog. They mostly have families with little kids in some cases, so it's a little harder for them to do stuff in the evening like this.
Well, I will say this. Before I actually came to college for many, many, many years, I was really looking to be a geologist and either go into volcanology or seismology as my main focus. So I have been just geeking out this entire show.
Well, here's one thing I have to say though. Seismology is safer than volcanology. Think about it.
And see that's the downside.
Volcanologists run towards the volcano. That is a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. But I've always wanted to go at least to Mauna Loa.
The other is such a hotter career though.
Sometimes a little too hot. So
Yeah, no pressure on that one either, right? Yeah.
I heard Darwin was a fan of it. Natural selection.
Yes.
All right, well, we will go ahead and wrap up this show. Once again, we would like to thank our guest, and if you would like, you can head on over to our next show, which should be starting up within the next 10 minutes. We'll get that started up, and we will give you a comprehensive debrief of the upcoming, or I guess briefing, it hasn't happened yet, of the upcoming winter weather that will be affecting much of the Carolinas and some of the northern states as well. For the Carolina Weather Group, I am Kit Cloninger, and best wishes to you all.